The envelope was pale ivory, the kind my son used to pull from my stationery drawer when he was little back when he loved making cards that said "I love you, Mom" in crooked blue crayon. That's what flashed through my mind before the chill set in. The handwriting on the front was neat, careful. My name wasn't there. Every other relative in our family had their name printed in curling gold letters, but mine was missing, like someone had sliced it clean off the page. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the envelope was just a spare or a sample. I turned it over, ran my thumb along the seal, felt the ridges of the wax circle pressed firm in the center. The scent of glue and fancy paper filled my kitchen. Morning light slanted through the blinds, cutting across my countertop in thin silver bars. I remember how the dust looked suspended in that light, still, quiet, waiting for me to breathe. I did open it, though my hands trembled. The invitation was beautiful. Cream lace border, a shimmer of gold foil, his name printed bold beside hers. The wedding date, in June. A place I'd never been, expensive from the look of it. I read it once. Then twice. My chest tightened until I had to put the paper down beside the coffee mug just to steady myself. A tiny ring of brown from the mug stayed behind, staining the edge like a bruise. That's when the disbelief began to crack and something heavier slipped through, something that hummed with years of sacrifice and late-night worries, years that apparently meant so little. My son was getting married, and I was meant to find out from an envelope not meant for me. I didn't know it yet, but the choice I made next would echo through every tomorrow we shared. My name is May Thompson. Most folks around our little town on the Carolina coast just call me Miss May, the same name that used to echo through the grocery store aisles when my son was small, climbing into the cart while I compared prices on canned peaches. I'm 58 now, a widow for 12 years, and though the years have pressed a few extra lines into my face, they've also carved room for patience. I work part-time at the elementary school cafeteria, serving mashed potatoes and gentle smiles to children who remind me what innocence sounds like. The smell of yeast rolls and chalk dust is my daily perfume. Ethan, my only child, was once my little shadow. He'd follow me from porch to garden, asking 1,000 questions, the kind only 5-year-olds can ask with straight eyes and no shame. When his father was still alive, our house pulsed with laughter that came easy, sometimes loud, sometimes the quiet sort that sneaks up after supper. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that used to be enough. I remember his high school graduation like it was yesterday. He wore a borrowed tie that didn't match his shirt, and I cried so hard the lady next to me offered me her napkin. "You did good, Mom," he'd whispered, squeezing my hand after crossing the stage. That moment sat in my heart like sunlight bottled for a rainy day. Every job promotion he got, every move he made, I clapped from the sidelines with pride stitched right into my bones. After his father passed, Ethan became my reason to keep walking. I never asked for much, just a phone call, a Sunday visit, maybe a chance to cook his favorite pot roast once in a while. When he met Lila, his fiancée, I thought I'd gain another daughter. I tried my best to welcome her. She was pretty in that city-polished way, heels always clicking, hair glossy, hands too delicate to touch dishwater. She came from money and looked at my modest house like it was something to be endured rather than appreciated. The first dinner I ever made for them ended in an awkward silence. I'd spent the whole afternoon seasoning that roast, setting out my late husband's best plates, hoping to make an impression. But when I asked about their plans, Lila smiled the way people do when they're trying not to roll their eyes. "We haven't thought that far ahead," she'd said, twirling her wine glass between manicured fingers. Ethan caught my hopeful gaze and quickly changed the subject. It was such a small moment, but it stuck to me. The polite distance in her voice, the way Ethan seemed to shrink beside her, like he didn't want the worlds we came from to collide too loudly. As months turned into years, their visits grew fewer, their calls shorter, and I told myself that's just how growing up works. You let them go so their wings don't rust. I believed my love was strong enough to keep us tethered, no matter how far life pulled him. That faith carried me through birthdays missed because of work trips, and holidays celebrated by phone instead of around my kitchen table. Whenever doubt whispered, I drowned it with casseroles for church potlucks and gossip with my friend Cora. Yet beneath every busy distraction lingered a tiny worry that I might have become a memory before I was ready to be one. And though I brushed it off, something inside me knew that love, when left unspoken too long, starts to fade around the edges. Back then, I thought love alone could bridge any distance between a mother and her child. I was wrong. Morning in my house begins with the sound of the coffee maker sputtering to life, like an old friend clearing its throat before telling a secret. The kitchen clock clicks faithfully, the smell of breakfast rolls through the air, and sunlight pools on the checkered linoleum like melted honey. It's a simple rhythm: wash the dishes from last night, water the fern by the window, check the weather just to nod at it. There's comfort in tiny repetitions when the rest of the world feels unpredictable. The school cafeteria waits for me by 7:30 every weekday. I slide into my hairnet, tie my apron, and help the other women Tilly and Rosa stack trays while laughter bounces off the metal counters. Tilly's always gossiping about her granddaughter's dating adventures, which sound far bolder than anything I dared at that age. Rosa hums gospel tunes under her breath, low and sweet enough to make the ovens feel like church pews. I find peace in that noise, the kind that holds you steady even when no one notices you're balancing heartache and mashed potatoes at the same time. Every few hours, my phone buzzes in my pocket. It's usually Cora sending me pictures of her cat dressed in ridiculous outfits, or another chain message promising blessings if I forward it 10 times. But sometimes it's Ethan, or it used to be. His texts have grown shorter over the years. Where it once said "love you, Mom," it now reads, "busy, will call later." Later doesn't come as often as it used to. I keep my phone charged anyway, just in case he happens to remember midday that his mother makes the best jokes about cafeteria food. On Tuesdays, the grocery store is my stage. I push my cart through aisles lined with people I've known since high school. They tell me about their children's marriages, grandbabies, retirements. I smile, genuinely happy for them, though each story lands somewhere tender. Sometimes, I spot little boys clinging to their mother's sleeves and wonder how those same hands will someday wave goodbye across a different kind of distance. Home evenings are soft and predictable. I cook for one, usually something practical like chicken stew, and eat by the living room window, watching cardinals peck at the feeder. Afterward, I settle into my worn armchair with a book or a Sudoku puzzle, the clock ticking a patient metronome beside me. There's no real loneliness in it, only a quiet stretch of space where voices used to be. When Ethan and I do talk, it's polite and brief. He tells me about deadlines, about new projects, about his boss who just doesn't get it. I listen, offer little pieces of advice that tumble out before I can stop them. Don't forget to eat on time, honey, or take a jacket, they say it's cold in the city. He answers with that sweet distracted tone, half affection, half absent-minded habit. I know his laughter by heart, that quick breath through the nose when something's only half funny. But I also hear the echo at the edges, the silence waiting its turn to hang up. Last December, I sent him his favorite pecan pie through overnight mail because he couldn't come home for Christmas. He texted a thank you with a smiley face, then disappeared for 3 weeks. I told Cora about it one Sunday after church, trying to make light of my worry. She patted my arm and said, "You raised a good man, May. Good men don't forget their mamas." I nodded and smiled, pretending faith was enough to fill the space his absence left behind. Nights stretch longer in an empty house. Sometimes I wake at 2 in the morning and replay old voicemails, just to hear his voice echo through the dark. There's one where he says, "Hey, Mom, just checking in, hope you didn't forget to rest." He laughs before hanging up, light and boyish, and for those few seconds I can almost pretend nothing changed. Then the recording clicks off, and reality sits down beside me again. Still, I keep living my days like pearls strung neatly on a thread: school, groceries, phone left on the counter, hope tucked somewhere in the middle. I remind myself that distance doesn't mean disconnection, that some seasons just require patience. Yet at the back of my thoughts, a small whisper starts to grow, quiet but unrelenting: "You can't miss calls that were never meant for you." I told myself he was just busy after all, love makes people forgetful. But sometimes, forgetfulness has a reason. It began so quietly that I almost missed it, the kind of moment you'd forget by morning if it didn't sit quite right in your chest. I was at the grocery store again, Friday afternoon, counting out oranges that weren't bruised, when I heard the Myers twins from church chatting by the flower display. They were talking about a wedding, someone's niece marrying a man named Ethan Thompson. One of them said, "Such a small world. Can you believe it's next month already?" My hands froze over the produce bag. I turned around, polite smile ready. "I'm sorry," I said, hoping my voice sounded casual. "Did you say Ethan Thompson?" The older twin blinked. "Why yes, Lila's fiancé." "Do you know them?" "Know them?" The words left my mouth in a whisper that didn't reach my heart. "He's my son." They exchanged that look people wear when they wish they hadn't spoken. "Oh, goodness," one stammered. "We just assumed, well, you must be over the moon." I nodded because that's what a mother is supposed to do. I paid for my oranges, left the cart half full, and walked out into the parking lot, sunlight stabbing through the windshield like questions I didn't want to answer. At home, the walls felt thinner, the silence heavier. I made tea I didn't drink, stared at the steam twisting upward, and replayed every conversation I'd had with Ethan over the past few months. He'd mentioned a new project, a busy schedule, even said he might be traveling for a bit. I'd filled those blanks with kindness, never once suspecting deceit might be curled up behind them. That night, I opened my laptop. The screen bathed the room in cold light, showing me things I hadn't been ready to see. My Facebook friends had shared pictures from bridal showers, ribbons wrapped around gifts, champagne flutes glinting. Front and center stood Lila, her smile perfect, her ring winking under the camera flash. Tag after tag, caption after caption, hashtag June wedding, hashtag Thompson love story. My stomach sank as each image loaded. When I tried to click Ethan's profile, I realized I couldn't see much at all. Some posts were hidden, others gone. It hit me then, he had adjusted his privacy settings. Against me. The small ache inside my chest deepened into something sour. I told myself that social media didn't mean everything, that maybe they wanted a surprise. But as the pictures scrolled by, each new post felt like a slow erasure of my place in his life. The next Sunday, after service, I found Cora waiting outside the chapel. The choir's last notes were still fading into the morning air. She looked uneasy. "May," she said softly, "I might have overheard something, and I didn't know if did Ethan tell you the big news?" For a second, I clung to denial like it was salvation. "He's getting married," I said, testing how it sounded aloud. Her eyebrows nodded. "Yes. I heard folks mention invitations going out last week." Every word she spoke pressed against my ribs, tightening the space where breath should be. Invitations. The plural, the normalcy of it, as if excluding me was a footnote instead of a fracture. I smiled thinly and thanked her, then walked home through streets dappled with sunlight and dogwood petals. Each petal that brushed my sleeve felt like a question, "Why not you, May?" That evening, I baked cornbread, something to anchor myself, to fold rhythm back into the chaos. The smell filled the kitchen, buttery and warm, but I couldn't taste a thing. I kept glancing at the phone, half expecting it to ring. I imagined Ethan's voice explaining everything, erasing my worry with that easy charm of his. He didn't call. Days blurred together like watercolor bleeding on wet paper. I went through motions: work, evening walks, small talk, but inside, unease had taken root. I caught myself rehearsing conversations that hadn't happened yet. "Ethan, why didn't you tell me, baby?" Or worse, was it her idea, or yours? The second week of April, I ran into Pastor Martin outside the post office. He asked if I would attend Ethan and Lila's blessed union. His question hung between us like dust motes in sun. I managed a smile that felt painted on. Of course, I lied. His relief was kind, mine was not. Back home, I sat on the porch swing and watched the world drift by. The trees whispered with that lazy coastal wind, but even their rustling sounded uncertain. I thought about motherhood, how it teaches you to trust every hesitation, because children communicate in the spaces between words. When Ethan was a boy, I could tell if he was hiding a bad grade or a broken toy simply by the way he avoided my eyes. Now, it seemed he just learned to look straight through me. I didn't sleep much anymore. Nights filled with questions that rearranged themselves into heavier versions. Maybe he was embarrassed of our small-town life, or afraid I'd say the wrong thing around her parents. Maybe Lila wanted a clean slate without a reminder of where her groom came from. Every reason I invented sounded more like an apology I was making for him. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived from my cousin Janine, the family historian who never missed a rumor. Tucked inside was a newspaper clipping from a city lifestyle magazine, Local Couple Plans Elegant Coastal Ceremony. The picture underneath showed Ethan and Lila holding hands beneath fairy lights. His smile was wide, untroubled, and it looked nothing like the boy who used to bring me daisies from the yard. I sat at the table, clipping between my fingers, and felt something harden inside me. Not anger yet, just the early frost of realization. Denial melted slowly, leaving behind a chill that wouldn't fade. I started noticing other things, too. His credit card bills came to my address once by accident, the forwarding label still smudged. The date and name of that coastal venue matched the gossip I'd overheard. There was no doubt left to hide behind. But what unsettled me most weren't the lies, it was how politely they'd been wrapped. No raised voices, no slammed doors, just quiet omissions, like he tidied away my presence so the picture would look neater. I sat that night clutching a half-cold mug of tea, staring at the porch light flickering against the window. Wondering when exactly love had turned into secrecy. When a lie is gentle enough, it sounds almost like love. But the truth will always find its way through the cracks. The truth caught up to me on a Wednesday evening, the kind of middle-of-the-week fatigue where you're too tired to lie to yourself. I'd just taken off my shoes after a long day at the cafeteria, my feet humming and my back stiff from leaning over trays all morning. I sat down with a bowl of soup when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me answered anyway. "Miss May," a woman's voice said hesitantly. "This is Clara from the florist downtown. Are you still taking care of the coordination for the rehearsal dinner?" For a second, I thought I misheard. "I'm sorry," I said, clutching the phone. "The what?" "The rehearsal dinner for Ethan and Lila," she repeated as though I were teasing her. "Your name was on the original contact list for family, but another number replaced yours last week." I just wanted to make sure. I didn't remember breathing as she spoke. The sound of the refrigerator buzzed too loud, the clock ticked too fast. "No," I finally managed. "No, I'm not taking care of that." "Oh." She exhaled through an awkward laugh. "Guess there was some confusion. Well, congratulations anyway. Big day coming up." I whispered a thank you and hung up, staring at the silent phone as though it had burned me. My soup had gone cold. The house felt suddenly enormous, every creak of the wood floor beneath me loud and accusing. Confusion turned to dread, dread to certainty. There it was, proof stitched into conversation and clerical error. Rehearsal dinner. Replacement number. Someone else had taken my place. I dialed Cora's number, hands trembling so much I could barely hit the right buttons. She answered on the second ring, warm and wary. "Sweetheart," she said, "I was meaning to call you." I didn't let her finish. "You knew, didn't you?" Silence poured through the line, thick as syrup. "Oh, May," she said at last, her voice breaking around the edges. "I wanted to tell you, but Ethan said he wanted no drama on his wedding day. He told everyone you two had talked, that you were fine not coming." My throat tightened until I could hardly speak. "He said what?" My voice cracked on the word. "That you'd understand," she whispered. For a moment, there was nothing but ringing. It filled my ears, my head, every hollow space inside me. I set the phone down on the table gently, careful not to let it slip from my shaking fingers. The kitchen light flickered, humming a tired song. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the window, the hollow eyes of a woman who'd spent decades loving someone who could erase her with a sentence. I walked to my bedroom and opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside were snapshots of Ethan's life, a lock of baby hair tied with blue ribbon, a crooked Mother's Day card, the medal he'd won for Little League when he was 8. I lifted them one by one, tracing edges, remembering each story as if saying, "Goodbye," to witnesses. I could hear his laughter from those years, raspy and high, the kind that used to bubble up during pillow fights on rainy nights. Now that sound felt borrowed from another lifetime. Every image rippled against the reality of who he'd become or maybe who I'd refused to see. He wanted no drama. Was I drama now? The same woman who worked double shifts to keep him in college, who pawned her wedding ring once so he could buy his first suit for an internship interview. The memory of those sacrifices beat inside my chest, steady and raw. My love had been quiet, reliable, unglamorous. And perhaps that was my mistake. I'd made love look too easy to appreciate. The phone buzzed again, Cora, texting apologies that blurred behind tears. I didn't answer. I went outside instead. The evening air smelled faintly of honeysuckle and salt from the coast. I looked up at the sky, flushed pink around the edges, and wondered which stars he would see that night, planning his vows with the woman he'd chosen above his own mother. My knees felt weak, but I sat on the steps, drawing slow breaths through the ache. Anger would have been easier. Anger would have kept me upright, but what settled instead was a hollow disbelief, a mourning that didn't know how to bury itself. I realized I wasn't jealous of her, I was grieving an invisible death, the loss of the bond one thought could never break. Later that night, I called my sister Deborah in Atlanta. She was practical, honest, a blunt instrument against self-deception. When she answered, her voice crackled with concern. I was hoping you wouldn't find out like this, she said right away. May, listen, it's complicated. Lila's parents, well, they're a certain way. They wanted everything controlled, tidy. Ethan thought maybe if you came, you'd feel out of place. Out of place. I repeated, my mouth dry. He said, she hesitated, he said he didn't want you to feel uncomfortable. He insisted it was to protect you from judgment. I laughed, a brittle sound that startled even me. Protect me from judgment by erasing me altogether? That's some protection. I know, sis, she said softly. He's caught between worlds. That girl's family can be, her voice trailed off, implying the word I wouldn't say snobbish. I sank into my chair, pressing my fingers against my temples. Do you know what it feels like, I asked quietly, to raise someone so completely that you forget to leave a piece of yourself untied so that when they walk away, you still have something left? Deborah didn't answer, only let out a long exhale that told me she understood more than words aloud. After I hung up, I wandered through the house like a ghost. Each room carried his fingerprints, the dent in the hallway wall from his skateboard accident, the old poster of his favorite baseball player rolled up behind the bookshelf. I touched them as if they were relics, sacred fragments of a life that had outgrown me. Near midnight, I opened the freezer and found his favorite peach cobbler I'd saved from summer. Ice fogged its lid, tiny crystals glimmering under the light. I held it a moment, then set it on the counter to thaw, suddenly too exhausted to put it back. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence again, that same monotonous buzz grounding me against the urge to unravel. Tears didn't come right away, they crept in slowly, quiet and determined. I cried for the years I'd spent staying up late to sew Halloween costumes, for every bedtime story read when I was bone-tired, for the nights I'd whispered prayers that he'd find someone to love him truly, never imagining that love could be weaponized against me. By the time dawn thinned the sky, salt had dried on my cheeks, but the grief inside me had settled into something strange and steady, like cooled glass. It didn't shatter anymore, it preserved. I brewed coffee and sat by the window, staring at the street beginning to wake. Somewhere out there, my son was ordering cake samples, laughing at color palettes, building a day where I didn't exist. And still I loved him. That was the cruelest part. The heart never learns boundaries the way pride does. For days afterward, I moved slowly, careful not to let bitterness spill into my daily conversations. At work, I served mashed potatoes with the same practiced smile. At church, I sang hymns with my eyes open, watching the stained glass scatter light over everyone else's families. I learned to disguise heartbreak as composure. It's a skill women like me have perfected for centuries. Yet beneath that calm, another current began to form. A quiet question breathed life into the space grief had hollowed out. What now, May? I thought about his words, no drama. Maybe he feared my hurt would embarrass him. Maybe he wanted control over how his story was told. But stories have a stubborn way of belonging to all their characters, not just the ones who write the guest list. That understanding didn't heal me, but it cleared a path. What he'd taken away wasn't just an invitation, it was my voice. And I've never been one to let silence speak for me for long. I could have sat there and cried. Instead, the silence inside me began turning into something steadier, resolve. When I finally slept, it wasn't rest that found me but something closer to surrender. The next morning the sun streaked across my quilt and pulled me upright, its warmth pressing against my eyelids until I had no choice but to open them. The world looked painfully ordinary, birds chirping, mail truck rumbling down the street, yet my skin felt new, uncomfortable, like it no longer fit the woman who had gone to bed the night before. I shuffled to the kitchen in my robe, boiled water for coffee, and stood there, staring at the steam rising from the kettle like a signal I couldn't quite interpret. My mind kept circling the same question: what do you do when someone you love pretends you don't exist? At first, I imagined confrontation. Maybe I'd drive to the city, walk up to his glossy apartment, ring the bell and wait. I'd picture the door opening, Lila with her perfect smile frozen mid-sentence. "Surprised, dear?" I'd say, half laughing, half crying. But that fantasy dissolved quickly. It wasn't dignity I saw in that scene, it was desperation wrapped in anger, and I was too old to rehearse pain for an audience. Then another thought crept in, quiet and dangerous. I could attend the wedding uninvited. I could take a seat in the back pew, invisible but present, arms folded over pride, letting him feel my absence even in my presence. I nursed that idea for a few hours, pacing between my kitchen and porch, testing how it felt inside my chest. But it soured fast. That wasn't my way either. I wouldn't crash what I'd been denied. The day stretched ahead of me like a narrow road lined with hard truths. I poured another cup of coffee, sinking into my armchair, eyes falling on the cedar chest again, the same chest I'd opened during my heartbreak. Beneath the stack of memories rested a small velvet box, burgundy, edges faded from decades of handling. Inside was my late husband's gold watch, the heirloom passed from his father before him. Ethan was supposed to wear it on his wedding day. He'd tried it on once as a teenager, rolling the strap around his wrist with exaggerated seriousness, saying, "One day, when I'm a grown man, I'll walk down the aisle with this." We'd laughed, the moment sealing itself like a photograph that never aged. I lifted the box now, felt its weight settle in my palms. The watch glinted faintly even in the morning light, a reminder of promises kept and broken. That's when the idea arrived, not out of vengeance, but from something deeper. I would take the expectation itself and hand it back, with my truth wrapped around it. Not a curse, not a plea, just the story that belonged to me, written in my own voice. I pulled out pen and paper, the heavy kind used for thank you notes, and began to write. "My dear son," I began, staring at the words until they blurred. "There are milestones a mother dreams of sharing with her child. I thought your wedding would be one of them. I won't pretend this hasn't wounded me. But if you truly believe your life will be happier without my presence, then I honor that choice, even if it breaks me to do so. Enclosed is your father's watch. He wanted you to wear it when you found someone whose hand you'd never let go. I hope you keep that promise, even if I only get to witness it from afar. Remember where you came from, and remember who taught you that real love doesn't erase people, it includes them. I love you still, beyond this moment, beyond my pride." My handwriting trembled, tears spotting the paper in uneven circles, but I didn't rewrite it. It needed to look like what it was, the truth of an imperfect heart refusing to bend into bitterness. I wrapped the watch carefully in linen, folded the letter around it, and slid both inside the velvet box. Then, almost on instinct, I tied it with the pale blue ribbon I'd once kept from his baby blanket. My fingers shook, but the knot held firm. Walking to the post office felt like walking underwater. The box in my purse seemed heavier than gold should ever feel. On Main Street, Mrs. Parker from the church stopped me, asked about my weekend plans. I smiled and said, "Just catching up on errands," the lie smooth on my tongue but rough in my throat. She chatted about azaleas blooming early this year, and I nodded, my mind half a world away. At the counter, the postal clerk weighed the package. "Special delivery?" he asked. "Yes," I said quietly. "To my son." He printed the label, slid the box into the outgoing bin. That was it, simple as handing over groceries. I walked outside into the sunlight, blinking against the brightness, and for the first time in days, I exhaled something that felt close to peace. That evening, I lit a candle beside my husband's photo on the mantel. "You'd have known what to do," I whispered to the frame, smiling at his frozen grin. But I tried the next best thing. The flame swayed, casting long shadows that moved like old memories across the living room walls. Still, habit makes sentiment linger, so before I slept, I composed one more message, a final attempt at closure. I opened my phone, typed Ethan's number, and wrote, "I sent you something important in the mail. Please take it seriously. Love, Mom." Then I hesitated and hit send. The thread went gray and silent. The next 2 days passed with uneasy patience. I did laundry, chopped vegetables, stood in my garden deadheading flowers. Every small act of tending became an act of prayer. When the mail carrier finally left an envelope addressed in Ethan's handwriting, my pulse jumped. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. His message was brief. "Mom, I got the watch. It means a lot. Please don't be upset. Things are complicated. I'm trying to make everyone happy. I'll call soon. Love, Ethan." That last line, "trying to make everyone happy," sat like a pebble in my shoe. It was the gentlest phrase in the world, yet behind it hid the truth: I wasn't part of everyone. I folded the note, set it beside his father's photograph, and whispered, "He thinks happiness means silence." That night, I reached for my old photo album. Between its pages, I found a picture of my wedding day, me and Frank, barefoot on the beach, the minister's voice carried away by the wind but our smiles rooted deep. We'd promised forever in simple words. Loss took that forever from me too soon, but love remained, loyal in absence. I realized I didn't need an invitation to bless my son's future, I could bless my own past instead. Saturday came, and with it inspiration that felt almost mischievous. I decided to hold my own little celebration of vows, at home, a quiet homage to the life Frank and I had built, the love that had made Ethan possible. I ironed my best dress, the pale lavender one I wore each Easter, set out the good china, and arranged daisies from the garden in a glass pitcher. Cora came over when she heard the plan. "Girl," she said, laughing softly, "you sure know how to make a point without raising your voice." "It's not a point," I told her, lighting another candle. "It's a reminder." We cooked together, simple food, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, butter beans. I set a place for Frank with his photograph propped up by the plate, and another for myself across from him. When we bowed our heads, I prayed aloud, not for forgiveness, but for steadiness. Cora's hand rested on mine. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. I smiled. Proud wasn't quite the word. Calm, maybe. Whole again, in my own small way. Later, when dusk softened the corners of the room, I stepped onto the porch with a glass of sweet tea. From somewhere inside the house, the clock ticked its steady rhythm. Beyond the street, the horizon glowed with the faint orange of evening, beautiful and indifferent. I thought of Ethan opening that box, reading my letter, the weight of his father's watch in his hand. Maybe his fiancée would ask who it was from. Maybe, just for a heartbeat, shame would glance across his face. Not to hurt him, but to remind him that the roots he'd tried to prune still lived, still grew quietly beneath his feet. I wasn't out to ruin his joy, only to remind him where he came from. The Sunday after my I vows supper, I walked the 2 blocks to church as I always did. Same street, same breeze carrying the smell of magnolias, same neighbor's dog barking at everything that moved. But the air was charged in a new way, like everyone knew a secret and didn't quite know how to hold it. News has a way of traveling faster than birds in small towns. By the time I reached the chapel steps, Cora was waiting out front with her lips pressed tighter than Sunday gloves. "May," she murmured, "they're whispering." "Let them," I said, straightening my hat. "They'll find something new once this story loses its shine." Inside, heads turned, not rudely, but with that mixture of pity and curiosity small communities specialize in. Voices hushed. I caught fragments. "Such a shame, still send him that watch, I'd never have the grace." The choir director offered me a tender smile, and I nodded back, pretending to focus on the hymn numbers posted by the pulpit. During the service, Pastor Martin's sermon drifted toward forgiveness, how love, when wronged, can choose silence or steadfastness. His words weren't pointed, but they found me all the same. I stared at the stained glass above him, vibrant blues bleeding into sunlight, and wondered if Ethan would ever step into a place this humble again. By evening, my phone began buzzing with messages, some kind, others not. "You did right, Miss May," one neighbor wrote. "He'll remember who raised him." Another said, "Maybe you should have stayed quiet. Children have their own lives." Each ping jolted my heart until I set the phone upside down and let the world chatter without me. The real consequence came 2 days later. I just finished mopping the cafeteria floor when Rosa came hurrying in, breathless. "May, turn on your radio. They're talking about that fancy coastal wedding, your son's wedding." I frowned. "The radio?" She nodded, eyes wide. "Local news, they covered it. Big society piece. They mentioned something about a missing mother and a letter that's making rounds online." My stomach dropped. I washed my hands, hurried to the teacher's lounge, and turned up the small radio on the counter. A crisp voice was already halfway through the segment. "The handwritten note from the groom's mother has struck a chord online after being shared by a guest. The letter, enclosed with a family heirloom, reads like both warning and blessing. Many listeners praise its dignity." I cut it off. I didn't need to hear my private grief translated into headlines. Someone at that wedding, maybe one of Lila's friends, had photographed the letter and posted it. Now, strangers were dissecting my pain, turning it into content. I pressed a hand to my chest, steadying the tremor rising there. Rosa touched my arm gently. "People see your grace," she said. "They see it even if your son didn't." That afternoon, as I left work, a woman from town stopped me on the sidewalk. "Miss May," she said, eyes soft, "that letter was the finest thing I've read in years. You made every mama proud." Her sincerity cracked something open in me, not pride exactly, but relief that my wound might serve a purpose beyond itself. By Thursday, Ethan's name had returned to my caller ID. I sat on the porch, legs propped on the swing's edge, when the phone lit up. My heart stumbled in my chest. I answered before courage had time to leave me. "Mom?" His voice, lower, hesitant, sounded younger somehow. "I was wondering when you'd remember the number," I said quietly. He took a shaky breath. "I messed up." Silence stretched, thick and heavy. Cicadas buzzed in the background, punctuating our awkward reunion. "What exactly did you mess up, Ethan?" I asked. "Forgetting the address on your invitations, or forgetting the woman who gave you one to begin with?" "I didn't mean for it to be like this," he blurted. "Lila's parents, they wanted a small event. They said it'd get complicated with different backgrounds, and you agreed?" My tone wasn't sharp, just exhausted. He hesitated. "I thought I was making it easier. I didn't think it'd blow up like this. Everyone's been talking about the letter. Her mother's furious, says it embarrassed them all." I let out a dry laugh. Imagine that. The truth embarrassing those who hid it. He exhaled, defeated. "Mom, you shouldn't have sent that letter." "I disagree," I replied, calm as the evening air. "If honesty causes shame, the shame doesn't belong to the honest one." The line went silent except for his breathing. Then, softer, "You always did know how to make me think too much." I felt my throat tighten, but I held steady. "Thinking never hurt anyone, son. It's the avoiding that does damage." He sighed, long and unsteady. "Some people called the letter beautiful. Others said it made me look bad." "Both can be true," I said. "Pain can be beautiful if you face it. Maybe this was the only way to hand you a mirror." He didn't answer for a moment. I pictured him standing on some pristine balcony, phone pressed to his ear, guilt threading through his fingers like sand. "You've every right to be mad," he said finally. "But I still love you." Love, I realized, was no longer a comforting word, it was a fragile declaration crawling out from rubble. Yet it was something. "Then learn what love actually demands," I said. It isn't comfort. It's courage. We didn't hang up right away. The pause between us was heavy with memories, baseball games, Saturday markets, the rustle of wrapping paper at Christmas. All of it flickered before me like film reels catching light in the dark. Finally he whispered, "I want to come see you after the honeymoon. Just to talk." I closed my eyes. You know where home is. It hasn't moved. When the line disconnected, I sat there for a long while, the porch swing gently creaking under my weight, heart pulsing steady and strange. Word of our conversation leaked soon enough. Small towns thrive on echoes. Some folks treated me like a hero, others muttered that I'd humiliated my own child. Both opinions brushed off me like wind, neither held the truth. I hadn't sought justice from people's tongues, I'd sought it from my conscience. Still, when I walked into the grocery store that weekend, whispers flitted around like moths. One woman leaned in too close at the produce aisle. "I tell you, May, that letter of yours should be framed. Might be the thing that keeps him humble." I smiled politely, chose my apples, and moved on. Inside, guilt and relief danced together uneasily. I hadn't planned the spectacle, I just wanted him to remember that dignity doesn't need to shout to be loud. A week later, a small parcel arrived at my door, return address, Ethan Thompson. Inside was my letter, folded neatly beside the gold watch. Attached was a note on plain paper, "I read your words again. I can't wear the watch until I deserve it. But I'll come for supper soon. E." I traced the handwriting, tears creeping hot and slow down my face. For the first time, there wasn't anger tangled in the sobs, just a long-awaited release. That evening, when Cora dropped by, I showed her the package. "He's coming home, Cora," I said softly. She squeezed my hands, eyes glistening. Outside, thunder murmured faintly on the horizon, the long-overdue promise of summer rain. I stepped onto the porch, letting the first droplets pepper my skin like forgiveness I hadn't dared ask for. For the first time in months, I heard my boy call me a mama again. And in that cracked voice, I heard something that sounded a lot like regret. The seasons don't announce themselves dramatically anymore. They slip through the edges of days, soft as breath on glass. One morning the frost has withdrawn its claim on the garden, another morning brings a shy green thread winding up from soil that once seemed abandoned. She notices, because noticing has become her religion. The small resurrected things, mint pushing near the fence, a wren bracing itself on the sill, her own pulse steady while tea warms in her hands, these are prayers now. He writes first. A plain envelope, unceremonious handwriting, no return address, just the faint scent of machine oil and sunlight baked into paper. Inside, only a few lines. No grand apology, no declarations, just "how are you?" And a sentence about rebuilding the wooden gate they'd hung together years ago. She reads it twice, aware of her heartbeat doing the old clumsy dance of hope and caution. She doesn't answer immediately. Time has taught her that speed is not the same as sincerity. Instead, she tends her plants, paints the shed door, sends birthday cards to nieces she hadn't seen since the divorce stormed through their calendar. Life, like a patient cat, returns only when it knows it will be fed. When she finally replies, her letter is blunt and kind at once. She thanks him for writing. She says she's well. She admits the gate needed rebuilding though, she adds, they both know she could have rebuilt it herself. That single line becomes her quiet declaration of independence. She signs her name and includes a short note about the late tomatoes. I can't tell if they're stubborn or heroic. Maybe both. Mail becomes their slow language, a correspondence of quiet weather reports and cautious jokes. Entire weeks pass between letters, no one rushes. They write about the garden, about a niece's new puppy, about the market gossip. The past, that once loud ghost, learns to whisper. Autumn slides in, gold and forgiving. One Saturday, he appears invited, this time for dinner. The kitchen smells like garlic, olive oil, and a tentative beginning. He brings bread he'd baked himself. She laughs, remembering the last time he tried, when the loaf could have doubled as a defensive weapon. This one's edible, he promises, half sheepish, half proud. The moment tilts toward laughter instead of regret. They eat slowly. Conversation walks on eggshells for a few minutes and then miraculously learns to crawl on its own. She mentions her morning jogs. He mentions fixing the old truck, how every repaired part still rattles but keeps moving anyway. It sounds like us, she says. Their shared grin lands softly, like rain returning after a drought. Forgiveness, she's discovered, isn't fireworks, it's the sound of chairs quietly shifting closer. It's butter melting on bread, sentences finishing without being cut in half. It's being able to meet his eyes and not feel the old tremor, only the steady thrum of human fallibility. Later, they step out to the porch. The evening smells of damp earth and distant barbecue smoke. Fireflies blink in clumsy Morse code. A breeze schemes through the herb patch she refuses to kill even in winter. He asks, "Do you ever miss what we had?" She thinks about the storms they survived, the silences they weaponized, the promises broken in slow motion. She says, "Sometimes. But missing doesn't mean I'd trade the calm I have now." The honesty lands clean and clear. He nods, respect replacing regret. Boundaries stand, firm but friendly like a fence that says this is mine, yet still allows sunlight through. For days afterward, they keep in touch, but sparingly. He visits occasionally, she doesn't rearrange her life around those visits. When he leaves, she waters the plants, sweeps the porch, returns to her own rhythm, not his tempo, not anyone's. The new growth is hers. Her neighbor, an elderly widow named Ruthie, jokes one afternoon that she looks 5 pounds lighter in spirit. She laughs so hard she nearly drops the watering can. Miracles do happen, she says, pulling up a stubborn weed, though they usually dress like chores. By early spring, the garden is alive with deliberate chaos. Lettuce where she didn't plant it, volunteers sprouting wild near the edges, bees bumbling like fuzzy pilots. She hands him during one of their amicable visits a small basket of herbs and says, "Return the basket when it's convenient, not legendary." They both laugh at the old reference to how long he once kept her Tupperware. Laughter is their new dialect, light, layered, aware of its own fragility. When rain begins, they shelter under the porch again. He mentions that someone new has asked him to dinner. For a heartbeat, she feels a curious stillness, something between nostalgia and relief. "She's lucky you learned to bake," she says with a smile that means exactly what it should, goodwill without ownership. He pauses. "You're sure you're okay with that?" "I'm okay, with me," she answers simply. The sentence pleases her. It sounds like the truth wearing comfortable shoes. After he leaves, she walks back into the kitchen and pours herself a glass of wine. The house feels peaceful, not empty. A thin streak of sunlight extends across the floor like an invitation to step forward. She writes his name on an envelope containing a recipe she's promised him, the famous soup he loved, and mails it the next day. No note this time, the recipe is enough, a language of affection without complication. Weeks later, she receives a postcard, a sketch of a gate half open, watercolor daisies on either side. The message, "Everything you said was right." The calm fits. She pins it on the fridge, smiles, and lets herself enjoy the simultaneity of closure and continuation. That night, sitting in the garden under tiny string lights, she reflects on all the fragments that no longer hurt when held up to light. Pain has worn itself smooth, like sea glass. Forgiveness has stopped being an obligation, it's become an instinct. Growth, she realizes, isn't a sprout, it's the unhurried dignity of staying. The neighbor's laughter drifts over the hedge. She hums faintly, some tune without a name, and lifts her glass as if to toast the invisible company of everyone who has ever learned to start again. The stars blink slowly, satisfied. Tomorrow there will be weeds to pull, letters to answer, coffee to brew, none of it needs to be when all the noise has settled and the dishes from that long ago dinner are tucked away, a strange thing happens, quiet becomes a teacher. It's patient, unhurried, and just stubborn enough to make sure you hear what it's saying. It tells you that love, real love, doesn't always look like arrival. Sometimes it looks like staying home so your heart can heal. Sometimes it looks like waving from the porch, trusting the person you love to find their own road, even if you can't walk it with them. I used to think motherhood meant never looking away, keeping vigil at every crossroad. The truth came later, soft as the realization that a candle can't guide anyone if it burns itself down completely. Parental love mixed with self-respect, that's the alchemy, sugar. It's a tricky recipe, like pie crust in July. You've got to keep it firm enough to hold shape, tender enough to break easily, and then hope the filling doesn't leak. For some of you listening, maybe the faces are different but the ache is familiar, a child who's grown distant, a sibling who stopped calling, the friend who no longer fits the outline of the friendship you remember. Each story hums the same tune underneath: how do we love without losing ourselves? I'll tell you what the garden taught me. You prune not because you dislike the branches, but because you want them to thrive. You water the ground, not the leaves, because roots need faith more than applause. And sometimes you step back entirely, so the sunlight can find what you've nurtured too carefully. That's the quiet contract of mothers and makers, and anyone who's ever raised something living. You give your best, you keep your doors unlocked for honesty, but you also keep your boundaries latched for peace. Children grow up, but mothers never retire from loving. There's no gold watch ceremony, no closing bell. You simply learn to shift the weight of care from your arms to your prayers, from your schedule to your heart. I remember the first night she called again after the long silence. Her voice carried the tentative courage of someone stepping onto new ice. We didn't talk about blame, we shared recipes and small laughter, the kind that can hold so much forgiveness between its syllables. In that moment I understood something I'd nearly missed. Sometimes reconciliation doesn't return as a parade, it returns as an ordinary phone call that doesn't hurt to answer. You see, we spend half our lives chasing the cinematic moment, the grand apology on a windswept beach, the perfect wedding dance where everyone suddenly understands each other. But life prefers quieter choreography. It moves by inches, not spotlights. The miracle often wears Monday clothes. So if you're holding memories that sting, let them rest a while. Pain cools when it's not constantly stirred. And when it finally stops boiling, you can taste what's underneath. The simple flavor of love trying its best within imperfect humans. Forgiveness doesn't ask you to forget. It only asks you to stop carrying memory like punishment. You can keep the lessons, release the bitterness, and still maintain the sacred distance that keeps peace intact. I've learned that standing your ground doesn't make you unkind. It makes you dependable to yourself first, then to others. Because when self-respect goes missing, even love starts to wobble. Boundaries are the bones that keep affection upright. And humor, dear ones, is how those bones heal. We laugh so we don't fossilize in our own sincerity. If we can still chuckle about oversalted soup or the ridiculous way we cry during commercials, then grace still lives here. The morning after she told me about her fiancé, I stood at the window and watched the neighborhood wake, same street, same mailbox, yet everything gleamed differently. I thought, this is what healing looks like, ordinary light noticing me back. Since then, I've kept that truth tucked in my cardigan pocket, that peace isn't a prize you win, it's a room you're finally willing to live in. So tonight, before you close this video and wander back into your own story, take a slow breath with me. Let the air remind you that you've survived every heartbreak so far. That's no small credential, sweetheart. That's a PhD in perseverance with a minor in hope. And now comes the part where Auntie May, still wearing her lilac housecoat and sensible slippers, looks straight through this little screen and asks the question every storyteller owes her listeners. Tell me honestly, if you were in my place, if love had asked you to stay, respect had asked you to pause, and pride had whispered from the wings, would you have gone to that wedding anyway, or stood your ground? I'm not asking for judgment. I'm asking for reflection. Because every heart collects a moment like that, the crossroad between wanting peace and being peace. What would your choice have sounded like in that room? If this story touched something tender in you, don't let it fade with the scrolling. Write a letter you've postponed. Water a plant you nearly gave up on. Call someone not because they apologized, but because you've found room to wish them well. That's the kind of bravery the world still needs. And if my kitchen table storytelling has added even a speck of light to your evening, you know how to find me again. Keep the kettle warm, share this space with someone who could use a gentle reminder that love still works, it just changes uniforms sometimes. When you step outside and feel tomorrow breathing on your face, remember this: forgiveness is not surrender, and distance is not proof of indifference. It's simply the geometry of grown hearts learning to orbit with grace. We've made it through the storm, you and I. Now look, the pavement is wet, but the sun has found its way back. Listen to that hush. That's truth exhaling. Thank you for keeping me company in it. Profound to be holy.